Hey everyone, this is Karenology. Today's story is so unbelievable. You'll think it's straight out of a movie. Let's get into it. I didn't see the truck until I was already ankle-deep in the morning mud, halfway across the south field, with a bale of feed slung over my shoulder. It was black, square, polished like a showroom model, and parked like it owned the damn place. No note, no knock, no neighborly wave. Just dropped right at the edge of my irrigation trench, tires chewing at the ground like it had a right to be there. There was a man leaning on the hood, arms crossed, sunglasses too shiny for a place like this. He had that stiff-backed stance of someone used to standing guard, but not the kind that keeps anything safe. More like the kind that gets paid to look official while doing absolutely nothing. I'd seen his type before. Clipboard cowboys, badge-wearing nobodies hired by the Homeowner Association to play sheriff in places they didn't belong. I shifted the bale off my shoulder and set it down slow. My boots squelched in the mud. "Morning," I said, but it came out flat. The kind of flat that means we're already past pleasantries. He didn't answer, just tapped the hood like he was proud of the paint job. Then he said, "Perimeter inspection. Homeowner Association's expanding observation zone. You'll be seeing more of us." I stared. This is a working ranch. That's my field. You parked on top of a drain line. He smiled, without moving his face. Map says this is transitional territory. We're here to document for future zoning. You can file an objection, of course. I looked at his badge. Plastic, clipped to his vest, with the HOA emblem printed in raised silver. It shimmered like it was something more than just theater. "File an objection?" I said. "You just parked on my land without asking. That's trespass, not a clerical mix-up." He shrugged. "We're authorized. You'll get the mailer." Then he turned his back to me and started taking pictures. Of my fence, my barn, my damn dog, who stood growling behind the gate, like he smelled something wrong. That was the moment I felt it in my chest. An old itch. Somewhere between fury and fear. Not just for the land, but for the way it was happening. Quiet, casual, like I was already supposed to know I'd lost something. By the time I made it back to the house, my hands were shaking. I didn't touch the coffee pot. Didn't turn on the radio. I sat at the table and stared out the window while the sun climbed over the trees. This wasn't about one guy in a truck. This felt bigger, like something I couldn't quite see yet. But it was already moving. And it had paperwork, clipboards, and a black SUV with county plates. Funny thing is, I thought I'd left all that behind when I buried my badge 15 years ago. But some things have a way of following you home, even if they change their uniforms. Later that afternoon, the letter came, folded like a thank you card, with a logo I'd never seen before. Notice of intent to integrate perimeter holdings. I didn't need to read past the first paragraph. The field out back, where my dad taught me to drive a tractor, where my wife and I used to sit on hay bales and drink warm beer after long harvests, was now marked for HOA acquisition review. Transitional zone. Subject to observation, access, and coordination. I sat there a long time, letter in hand, until the sun dipped behind the sycamores. Then I folded it in half and dropped it straight into the wood stove. But fire doesn't burn bureaucracy. Not really. It just warms your hands while the world you know begins to dissolve at the edges. That night, I stood on the porch, watching shadows stretch across the pasture. I heard the coyotes yipping far off, and the slow creak of my barn roof settling. And I knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to take this place without a fight. And I wasn't the same man they thought they were dealing with. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Not fast, not frantic. Just a slow, confident crunch, like whoever it was didn't need permission. I threw on my boots and coat, still damp from yesterday's field work, and stepped outside. Same truck, different day. The guy was already out, holding a digital scanner, sweeping it lazily across the fence line, like he was shopping for groceries. He didn't acknowledge me right away, just mumbled something into a headset. I could hear his voice echo faintly from the device clipped to his belt. Unregistered structures. Turn your camera needed. Unregistered structures. That was my chicken coop he was pointing at. Built it with my own hands back when my wife wanted fresh eggs, and we were still dreaming about selling to local bakeries. Now it was a blip on his scanner, something to flag. We didn't finish our conversation yesterday, I said, walking toward him. He didn't flinch. Just looked up like I was an interruption to whatever script he was running. I'm authorized to perform non-invasive mapping. Your objections are noted. My objections aren't the problem, I said. It's your presence. This is private property. He gave me that bureaucratic half smile again. Sir, the Homeowner Association's guidelines allow for environmental pre-evaluation in proposed acquisition zones. That's when I noticed the small camera he'd strapped to my gatepost. Taped, no less. Like some cheap surveillance job pretending to be official. I pulled it off and held it out. This stay or go with you? He reached for it. I dropped it in the trough. That got his attention. His face pinched like he wasn't used to being told no. We can report property interference, he said. You're creating liability. I took a step closer. Close enough that he finally had to look me in the eye. You want to file a report? Go ahead. But you better be ready to back it up in court with a real badge. He backed off. Just a little, but enough. By noon, he was gone. But not before dropping another yellow marker flag into the soil next to the north fence. I pulled it out and tossed it behind the barn. That's when I noticed the footprint. Not mine, not his. A third set, deep in the mud, heading around the backside of the house. Later that day, I drove into town to the records office. I hadn't been inside that brick building since I registered the property transfer after my father died. The place smelled the same. Old paper, toner, and coffee that's been sitting too long. Behind the counter was someone I hadn't seen in years. Jenna? My niece? My brother's girl. She looked up from her monitor and smiled, surprised. Uncle Larry? Haven't seen you since the funeral, so I nodded. I need to see zoning overlays. Recent ones. Anything the Homeowner Association's filed in the last 3 months. Her face changed. Not cold, but cautious. Why? I told her about the guy, the mapping, the scanner, the letter, all of it. She tapped on her keyboard. Slow. There's been a lot of redrawing lately. Mostly paper exercises. I don't think any of it's finalized. But they've been lobbying the county hard. Infrastructure proposals, environmental impact reports, stuff that justifies expansion. Do any of those overlays touch my property? She paused. Didn't answer. Just turned her monitor slightly so I could see. There it was. A digital line slicing through the southern edge of my land like it was nothing. That's not even accurate, I said. That section's not accessible by road. She hesitated. They're calling it a transitional buffer. It's not acquisition yet. Yeah, well, they're treating it like it already is. She folded her hands. I'm not supposed to say this, but they're trying to surround the larger parcels first. Make the resistance scattered. You're one of the big ones, Uncle Larry. I stared at the screen. My land. My name. Red lines crawling across it like veins on a map. Why are you telling me this? Because Dad wouldn't forgive me if I didn't. I left with a copy of the overlay, printed on county paper. It felt like holding a death certificate. Not for me. For the life I built. That night, I slept with the porch light on. Not because I was scared, because I wanted them to know I was still watching. 2 days later, the fire came. It wasn't big. Not at first. Just a curling line of smoke rising from the edge of the south barn, like a whisper trying to become a scream. I caught it early. Too early for it to be natural. No lightning, no burn permits nearby, just dry straw and a clean break in the lock on the side door. I kicked it open with my boot and saw the flame already licking. At the hay bales. Small, but hungry. Grabbed the extinguisher, hosed it down, coughing the whole time. The smell of burning wood and betrayal settled in my nose, like it had every right to be there. When the sheriff finally showed up, 40 minutes later, he was polite, but his tone had edges. Deputy Ellis, young, clean uniform, eyes that flicked from me to the scorched doorway, like he was measuring more than just damage. You think this was arson? He asked. I pointed to the busted lock. I think it was a message. He scribbled something. Any suspects? Enemies? I looked past him to the edge of my pasture, where yesterday's yellow HOA marker still fluttered like a warning. Yeah. About 6 of them in polos with clipboards. He raised an eyebrow. The Homeowner Association? You think they'd torch your barn? No, I said. But someone working with them might. Someone who wants me to feel cornered. He didn't write that part down. I will log it, he said. Let you know if anything turns up. Which meant, good luck, old man. You're on your own. That night, I found my old shotgun and sat by the window. Not loaded, just there. A symbol. Something that said, I see you. Come again, and we'll see how quiet this place really is. The next morning, I woke to silence. No birds, no wind. Just the hum of tension you only hear when something's about to break. That's when Kevin showed up. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Used to be a friend, back before he sold his south parcel and started working in advisory services for the HOA. Now he wore pressed jeans, a tucked-in shirt, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Larry, he said, like we were still neighbors. I didn't move from the porch. You're a long way from the office. He chuckled. Didn't need an office to swing by. Just wanted to talk. Art. Talk or warn. He rubbed the back of his neck. They're serious this time. The association. They've got county ears now. Funding. People high up listening. They want this region shaped a certain way. And I'm the wrong shape, is that it? You're holding ground. That's not part of the plan. Funny, I said. Holding ground used to be a compliment. Kevin sighed. Sat on the edge of the porch like he still had the right. There's a way through this. You lease the south field. Let them put up a utility shed. Maybe a drone station. In return, they leave the rest of your land alone. Like a trade. Give them a foothold so they can plant the next wedge. It's just land, Larry, dirt, and fences. We're all moving forward. No, I said. You're moving in. There's a difference. He stood, brushed the dust off his jeans. Think about it. I don't want to see this end messy. I watched him walk back to his SUV, the same make and color as the one that first showed up. That night, I walked the perimeter of my property. Not out of fear, out of instinct. That same feeling I had overseas, on patrol, when you knew something was watching, but couldn't see it yet. By the time I circled back to the porch, I saw it. Another camera. This one hidden behind the birdhouse. I didn't pull it down. Not yet. I wanted them to think I hadn't noticed. Sometimes the best way to hunt is to let the other guy think he's the predator, and then wait. It rained that night. Hard enough to flood the north trail and turn the back pasture into a slick, pulsing bog. The kind of storm that shook windows and reminded you who really ran this land. I stayed up listening to it, tracking every creak of the roof, every hiss of wind against the siding. By morning, the world was gray and heavy. I stepped outside and immediately saw the tire tracks. Deep, fresh, and cutting across the lower slope, where no vehicle should have been. The mud was churned up, like someone had tried to reverse out and failed. My boots sank 3 inches with each step as I followed the trail. It ended at the edge of the creek. There, half submerged and tilted like a beached whale, was another black SUV. Front wheels dipped into the water, back end hanging by a thread. No lights, no movement, just the silent hum of authority caught in its own arrogance. I circled once, checking for signs of life. Empty, and then I saw the sticker, Homeowner Association Security Unit 04. Part of me wanted to laugh. The other part wanted to scream. They were watching, trespassing, hiding, and now they were drowning. I didn't tow it. Not yet. Instead, I hiked back up to the house, grabbed the old game camera from the shed, and mounted it on a fence post aimed straight at the mess. If they came back, I wanted to see who they sent. Turns out, they didn't come that day. Or the next. But someone else did. 3 men in suits. Not local. Shoes too clean. Accents too polished. They didn't knock. Just stood near the gate, talking into phones and gesturing like they were directing traffic on a film set. One of them wore mirrored glasses, even though the sun hadn't broken through the clouds in 2 days. I walked down slowly. Didn't say a word until they looked up. We're here to recover lost property, the tallest one said. I didn't blink. You mean the truck you dumped in my creek? We understand there's been some confusion about jurisdiction. No confusion here, I said. That's my land, your truck, your problem. He stepped forward like that meant something. There's an arrangement being processed. Formal transition zones. Integration initiatives. You'll receive documents soon. What I'll receive, I said, is an invoice for every inch of damage done to my irrigation, my field, and that creek. Another one smiled. A lawyer smile. The kind that means we hear you and we don't care. They didn't remove the truck, just left it there like it wasn't their concern anymore. By the third day, the wheels were underwater. By the fourth, it stank like oil and algae. My cows wouldn't drink from the downstream tank. That night, I sat in the barn sharpening fence wire. Not out of rage, out of clarity. I needed leverage. Next morning, I visited Sydney. Old friend. Former engineering professor turned recluse. Built half the county's irrigation systems back in the day. He was the kind of man who understood water like most folks understood breathing. How bad is it? He asked after I laid it all out. They've got influence, money, county ties, and they think I'll blink. Sidney rubbed his beard. You remember your grandfather's tunnel? The flood bypass one? Barely. Dad sealed it before I was 10. Said it was dangerous. Still down there? He said. Still active. And if I remember right, it runs right under that back lot they want to build on. I looked at him. You saying what I think you're saying? He smiled without smiling. I'm saying the ground under their foundation isn't as solid as they think. You're bombed. I drove home with my mind buzzing. Old maps. Old pipes. Forgotten routes like veins in the dirt. Sometimes the past doesn't just haunt the land. It protects it. And if they wanted to play rough, well, I'd buried deeper things than this before. By the time I dug out the old blueprints from my father's lockbox, the ground had started to shift, literally and otherwise. Heavy rains came through again, turning the south quarter into a sponge. The HOA men didn't show, but their absence felt louder than their presence ever had. The truck was still in the creek, now half covered in runoff mud. I left it there. Let it rot like a monument to their arrogance. The cows avoided that whole corner. Smart animals. The tunnel Sidney mentioned? It was real. I found the old entrance hidden behind a thicket of blackberry bramble, rusted shut but intact. Took me the better part of a day to clear the brush and break the seal. The air that came out smelled like old metal and wet rock, like something waiting to remember what it was. Inside, it stretched wide enough for a man to crawl, lined with stones and decades of silence. My father had told me once, quietly, almost like a confession, that his father had built it in the 30s after a flood took half the herd. It was meant to drain excess water back into the auxiliary ravine. It worked. Until it was forgotten. But now, it was a path. Not for escape. For strategy. I spent the next 2 days mapping the flow, clearing debris, tracing its reach. The far end opened just beneath the back field. The Homeowner Association wanted to turn into an access hub. Their future build site, marked by temporary fencing, survey poles, and a laminated sign with corporate buzzwords, like community utility convergence. I walked up to the sign that night and stared at it. Then I spit on the base and walked back. The next morning, I started planning. Sidney came by with a roll of plastic tubing and a pressure valve rig he'd salvaged from an old greenhouse. If you're going to do this, he said, do it clean, no mess, just consequence. We spent the afternoon fitting the pieces. Not sabotage, not vandalism. Just hydraulics and physics. 2 nights later, the inspectors returned. I watched from the porch as 3 hard hats walked the flagged perimeter, nodding and pointing. One of them bent to inspect a soil sample. Another checked a drone's remote feed. They didn't know they were standing over a pressure line. That night, it rained again. Harder than before, and I knew what would happen. The tunnel filled. The pressure rose. By morning, the field had buckled. A wide, soft sink of wet earth formed at the center of the proposed hub. The flags lay scattered. The laminated sign bent at the middle. One of their soil cores disappeared entirely. At noon, a contractor's truck pulled up. They walked the field, measured, probed, and then, quietly, they left. But Kevin didn't. He showed up just after dusk, headlights off, walking instead of driving, like he thought stealth would buy him trust. I met him halfway down the slope. You did this, he said. Not a question. Nature did, I answered. I just gave it a path. He looked tired, angrier than before. Not righteous, cornered. They're not going to stop. You embarrassed them. That makes you a liability now. They parked a surveillance truck in my creek, burned my barn, drew lines through my family's land. And you're worried about their feelings? He stepped closer. They have lawyers, Larry. Connections. You think a patch of flooded dirt's going to stop a machine like that? I stared him down. No. But it might make them think twice before planting flags in other people's lives. He looked away. Said nothing for a long while. Then, there's a new proposal coming. Bigger. County level. They want to rezone the entire southern corridor. Your place included. If it passes, you'll be designated transitional use, regardless of protest. And you're here because I used to respect you, he said. And because if you go down swinging, I want you to know where the next punch is coming from. I let him leave. Didn't thank him. Didn't curse him either. That night, I stood in the tunnel mouth. Flashlight bouncing off wet stone and coiled pipe. Transitional use. Like I was temporary, like they thought I could be redefined. But you can't rezone what you don't understand. And they never did understand what kind of man they were dealing with. It started with a drone. Just after dawn, I heard the high-pitched whine before I saw it. A sleek black quadcopter, hovering above the west pasture, drifting slow like it was sniffing something out. It dipped low over the chicken coop, then circled the barn twice before rising again and shooting off toward the tree line. An hour later, a manila envelope appeared at my gate. No postage, no return address. Just a single sheet inside. An aerial photo of my ranch with red overlays marking unauthorized modifications. Below it, a note. Ongoing surveillance due to non-compliance. I stared at the paper, then at the sky. They weren't just watching now. They were documenting, building a case. I burned the envelope. Later that day, a county vehicle pulled into my driveway. Official plates. Dustless paint job. A woman stepped out. Mid-40s, gray suit, clipboard like a weapon. She introduced herself as Ms. Garland, liaison for regional development, under the new Unified Zoning Initiative. I'm here to inform you of the pending reclassification of your parcel, she said, like it was a traffic ticket. You'll be receiving formal documentation within the week. What kind of reclassification? She flipped the page. Transitional Use Corridor. Your land will serve as a buffer zone for community integration, subject to joint oversight and regulatory alignment. English, please. She smiled. They're redrawing the map. You're in the middle of their future. I didn't ask to be. No one ever does. I folded my arms. What happens if I refuse? You won't be forced to sell. yet, but your access may be limited. Utilities rerouted. Services reevaluated. It wasn't a threat. It was a list of punishments. She left without shaking my hand. That night, my power flickered twice, then stayed off. I called the utility company. 20 minutes on hold, then a message. Service in your area has been rerouted due to infrastructure review. Estimated time to resolution. Pending. I lit the old kerosene lamps and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark window. This wasn't random. It was orchestration. The next morning, Sydney showed up with a thermos of black coffee and a newspaper I didn't subscribe to. Front page, Regional Expansion Plan. Accelerated. Southern Corridor identified for immediate action. True. They're pushing it through faster than we thought, he said. Emergency measures, citing development delays. They want to break ground before resistance takes root. I thought too late for that. We drove out to the tunnel. The rain had paused, but the ground was still soft, damp with memory. We checked the valve rig. Intact. Holding. Then we walked the length of the pipe. Near the far end, just beneath the field's rise, we found footprints, new ones. Heavy boots. Deep tread. Someone had been down there. They found the outlet, Sydney muttered. Probably didn't realize it was man-made, but they'll figure it out. Then we stay ahead. Back at the house, I sketched out a new plan. Not sabotage. Diversion. I didn't need to destroy anything. I just needed to make it unstable enough to stall them. Bureaucracy hated uncertainty. It fed on clarity, paperwork, and dry facts. So I gave them mud, mystery, and noise. Over the next 2 days, I rigged an old weather station to spit out false rainfall data. Sydney helped me wire the transmitter through the barn's solar array. According to the feed we sent to the county system, my field had become a seasonal floodplain. The effect was immediate. Garland called back. We've identified topographical discrepancies, she said, her voice clipped. Site may be subject to hydrological reevaluation. Development will pause pending further analysis. Pause. Not stop. But it bought time. Then, just when I thought we had a moment to breathe, the silence hit. Jenna stopped returning calls. I drove to the county office, but her desk was empty. Another clerk said she'd been placed on administrative leave, pending conflict of interest review. Kevin, I thought. He warned them. That night, I found a note under my door. No signature. Either. They're moving internal. If you keep pushing, they'll come at you sideways. Be ready. I sat alone on the porch until dawn, shotgun across my lap, watching shadows shift. They weren't trying to take my land anymore. They were trying to erase me from it. It was the silence that got to me. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that creeps in after something's been broken. After Jenna vanished from the county office and Sydney stopped answering his landline for a full day, I knew they weren't waiting anymore. They were executing. It hit the feed store first. Walked in one morning to pick up my usual grain order and found the shelves half empty. Earl, the owner, stood behind the counter, eyes darting like he was expecting someone to follow me through the door. Larry, he said with a strained smile, things have gotten complicated. What kind of complicated? Code enforcement came by, told me I had violations. Hazard disposal, packaging standards, nonsense like that. Said I was servicing properties under administrative flag. You mean me? He didn't answer. Just scratched his beard and looked down. I can't sell to flagged lots without putting my license at risk. They made that real clear. It was a surgical move. Cut the supply lines, isolate the node. I wasn't just being targeted. I was being erased. One service at a time. I drove straight home, dust trailing behind me like a fire line. The power was still off. The phone line was still dead. I parked, walked inside, and sat at the table in the quiet. On the third knock, I already had the door halfway open. Kevin stood there. No smile this time. They're preparing an injunction, he said. Environmental interference, unauthorized hydrological manipulation, and a community endangerment clause. That's not a warning, I said. That's a threat with a suit on. He nodded. I didn't come to warn you. I came to say goodbye. I've been reassigned. Too close to the situation. They're bringing in someone new. Cleaner. Less local. You helped them map this land, and you used it better than they ever could have predicted. That's the difference. I looked at him hard. Why are you telling me this? He hesitated. Because what's coming next won't be legal. They'll frame it like it is, but it won't be. And I don't think you've got many allies left. I've got land, I've got time, not much of either. He left without another word. That night they came. 3 SUVs. Black as coal. No markings. They didn't drive up to the house. They parked down by the field and spread out on foot. No flashlights. Just shadows moving through fog. I stayed inside. Didn't go for the shotgun. Didn't make a sound. I needed to know how far they'd go. Around midnight, one of them reached the barn. I watched through the slats in the upstairs window, heart pounding like it was still 20 years ago. He placed something on the ground, backed up, and clicked a remote. A slow hiss, then smoke. Not fire. Not explosion. Just a choking, metallic fog that spread low along the ground, like a hunting dog. I grabbed a rag, soaked it in water, and waited. By dawn, they were gone. The barn smelled like acid and scorched hay. The chickens were coughing. I didn't even know chickens could cough. Later that morning, a county inspector arrived. Clipboard, mask. Measured readings with a scanner and shook his head. Chemical imbalance in the soil, he said. Possible contamination. You'll need to evacuate livestock until we get lab results. How long? He shrugged. Could be weeks. Maybe longer. I didn't argue. Instead, I loaded the animals into the trailer, took them to the neighboring farm. The only place left that hadn't shut its gates on me yet. An old widow named Doris, too stubborn to care about regulations. You didn't ask, she said, so I won't answer. When I got back, the sign was up. Unsafe for occupancy. Under county review. They weren't hiding anymore. They were claiming. I walked back into my house, stood in the center of the kitchen, and closed my eyes. And then I started moving, not away, not out. Down, to the tunnel, to the valve, to the plan Sydney and I had whispered about, but never used. The one that wasn't for stalling. The one that was for ending it. If they wanted this land so bad, maybe it was time to let it swallow something back. The tunnel was colder than I remembered. Moisture clung to the walls like old secrets. And every step echoed louder than it should have. I carried the tools in a canvas sack over my shoulder. Just like Dad used to, back when he taught me how to fix a fence, patch a pipe, or reroute a current without leaving a trace. I knew what I was doing wasn't clean, wasn't noble, but it was necessary. At the valve junction, I paused. The metal was damp, the bolts crusted with years of sediment and rust. But it held. It always held. That's what Dad said. A good build outlives its blueprint. Sydney's retrofitted pressure gauge still blinked green. I adjusted the flow, just a nudge. Not to burst, not to flood. Just enough to crack the silence above. Back at the surface, the sun was high, but the air felt thick. I walked to the field's edge, where their new staging trailers had appeared overnight. Modular units, shiny and soulless, like they belonged to another planet. Men, in high-vis vests, walked the perimeter with tablets. One of them pointed toward my house. I kept walking. Then I saw Garland again. She stood beside a county SUV, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. When she noticed me, she stepped forward. "Mr. Reed," she called, voice sharp but tired. "We've received final clearance. The corridor will be activated within the week. I suggest you prepare your things. And if I don't?" She hesitated. "Then we'll proceed under Emergency Integration Authority. You'll be removed. Not arrested, not fined. Just moved. Just moved, like furniture." I looked her in the eye. "You're not the first person to try to remove me. You don't understand, Mr. Reed. This is already done." Then why are you still talking to me?" She didn't answer. That night, I waited as the wind shifted and the clouds gathered. As the ground drank in the pressure from beneath, and the earth began to remember how to groan. Around midnight, I heard it. Not an explosion, not a collapse, a deep, wet tearing sound, like a tree uprooting itself, then shouts. I ran outside and saw their lights flickering near the staging trailers. One unit had sunk at an angle. The support jacks twisted. One side swallowed by a sinkhole that hadn't been there an hour ago. Mud oozed up from underneath, like it had been waiting for years. A small landslip followed, cutting off the temporary access road they'd carved across my property's edge. One of their trucks teetered sideways before being pulled back by a panicked worker. By dawn, the trailers were dark. The men were gone. But the real moment didn't come until noon. That's when a convoy of county trucks rolled up. Not to enforce, not to inspect, to assess. Real engineers this time. Soil teams. Hydrologists. I watched them from the ridge with Sydney, who'd reappeared like smoke from the brush, holding 2 thermoses of coffee and that same crooked grin. "You didn't flood 'em," he said. "You unbuilt 'em." Didn't have to swing a hammer, just loosen a few truths. You think it'll stick?" "No," I said. "They'll be back. Different name, different plan." Sydney sipped. "Then what was the point?" I looked out across the land, the bent trailers, the cracked ground, the stunned officials trying to explain something that didn't fit in a report. The point was to remind them, some places push back. He nodded. "And some men don't move." The county halted the integration initiative 2 hours later. Not canceled. Just paused. But that pause was loud. Loud enough to echo across meetings, committees, and balance sheets. And while they scrambled to reframe, redraw, and reassess, I went back to my porch. The sign still stood, unsafe for occupancy. But inside, the lights were on again, and the land, for once, was quiet. The county left before sunset. No speeches, no apologies. Just trucks rolling back down the gravel road in silence. like men retreating from a place that had reminded them of something too old, too rooted, to pave over. I watched from the ridge until the last taillight disappeared behind the hills. Then I went home. The barn was still scarred. The fields still soaked. The fence line needed mending. The gate creaked louder than it used to, and the chicken coop had fewer birds than I remembered. But it was mine. Every inch of it. Still standing. Still breathing. Next morning, I walked the land. Not out of habit, out of respect. Every step, every corner. I checked the old tunnel inlet and resealed the valve. No need to tempt the earth twice. The land had spoken. That was enough. 2 days later, a letter came. No threats this time. No stamped warnings or overlays. Just a single page, crisp and impersonal. The Homeowner Association and its affiliates have opted to withdraw immediate development initiatives within the southern perimeter of Green Hollow Township. Reassessment pending. In other words, they were backing off for now. I didn't frame it. I didn't burn it. I pinned it to the wall of the barn, right next to an old photo of my father, standing where the west fence ends, holding a shovel and wearing the kind of look that said, "Go ahead, try me." Later that week, I got a visit from someone new. Not HOA, not county. A young man in boots. Too clean for real work. Said he was from an environmental nonprofit. They'd heard about what happened. Wanted to offer protection consultation. We could designate your ranch as a heritage zone, he said. Make it harder for future development. And easier for you to put your name on it, I replied. He blinked, then laughed, a little nervous. We'd keep you involved, of course. I leaned against the post. Son, I didn't hold this land for 60 years just to hand it over with a different logo on the letterhead. He got the message. Drove off with a polite nod and a hollow promise to be in touch. They always promise to be in touch. That night, I sat with Sydney out on the porch. 2 chairs, 1 old dog at our feet, and a bottle of something we should have opened 10 years earlier. Think they'll come back, he asked. Probably. With bigger words and smaller morals. You ready for that? I looked out over the pasture, at the sky starting to blush with evening. I'm not building a fortress, I said. I'm building memory. That's harder to tear down. He raised his glass. To memory. And to bad soil. We drank. In the weeks that followed, neighbors I hadn't seen in years started showing up. Not with signs or rallies, just hands. Helped me restack the barn. Replace the gate. Someone left feed at my door. Someone else fixed the power line without asking. No speeches, just presence. The land was still mine. But the story? That was starting to belong to more than just me. Funny thing is, I never wanted to be a symbol. Never wanted to fight. But sometimes the ground you stand on refuses to be silent. And if you've got the legs to hold it, the voice finds you. I don't know how long this peace will last. Maybe months? Maybe just until the next name shows up with a plan and a handshake that feels more like a rope. But I'll be here. Fence rebuilt, tunnel sealed, shotgun clean, and a kettle on the stove for anyone who walks up honest, because this place doesn't belong to papers or maps. It belongs to the man who stayed, and I'm still here.